My name is Hazel Mitchell, and I'm 28 years old. I still remember the exact moment I finally stood up to my parents at our annual family reunion at their sprawling Connecticut estate. When my mother accidentally spilled red wine all over my brand new white dress, I caught that familiar smirk as she whispered, "Oh, sorry, it was just an accident." After years of similar accidents and constant undermining, something inside me snapped. This time, I decided I wouldn't just smile and let it slide. If you're watching this video, I'd love to know where you're viewing from. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button to hear more stories about setting boundaries with toxic family members. Growing up in our upper-middle-class household in Westport, Connecticut, I always felt like I was walking on eggshells. My parents, Margaret and Richard Mitchell, were masters of emotional manipulation and passive-aggressive behavior, though you'd never know it from the outside. They maintained a perfect image in our community, successful, charitable, and admired by all. My father built his wealth through investment banking, while my mother was the quintessential socialite who chaired every important committee in town. From an early age, it was clear that my younger brother Nathan was the golden child. 3 years my junior, Nathan could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. His mediocre grades were celebrated, while my straight A's were expected. When he decided to follow my father into finance, despite barely passing his business classes, my parents beamed with pride. Meanwhile, when I graduated with honors and landed a prestigious marketing position at a Fortune 500 company, my mother simply said, "How nice, dear. I hope you'll still have time to find a husband." The pattern of favoritism wasn't just about achievements. It extended to every aspect of our lives. Nathan's birthday parties were elaborate affairs with dozens of guests, custom cakes, and expensive entertainment. Mine were often combined with other family events to save everyone the trouble of multiple gatherings. My parents never missed any of Nathan's basketball games, but they attended only one of my debate team finals, and left halfway through. What really defined my relationship with my parents, though, were the countless accidents that always seemed to happen in public settings. There was the time they forgot to tell me the family Christmas party had been moved up 2 hours, causing me to arrive when everyone was already finishing dinner. Or when my mother mistakenly told my father's business partners about the time I wet the bed at summer camp when I was 10, right as I was discussing a potential job opportunity with them. These incidents always happened in front of extended family or their friends. Never when we were alone. It was as if they needed witnesses to my humiliation, but also needed plausible deniability. "We would never deliberately embarrass you, Hazel," my mother would say with wide-eyed innocence whenever I confronted her. "You're being too sensitive again." I tried addressing the issue multiple times throughout my 20s. After college, I sat them down for a serious talk about how their behavior affected me. My father checked his watch every few minutes while my mother dabbed at imaginary tears, claiming I was breaking her heart with these false accusations. When I brought up specific examples, they were dismissed as misunderstandings or my own clumsiness. Eventually, I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Rebecca Collins, who helped me understand that what I was experiencing was a form of emotional abuse. She explained concepts like gaslighting and scapegoating, terms that gave shape to the fog I'd been living in. For the first time, I had validation that my experiences and feelings were real, not just me being too sensitive as my parents always claimed. My boyfriend Thomas Wilson entered my life 3 years ago. Unlike previous boyfriends who had been charmed by my parents' social graces and wealth, Thomas saw through their facade almost immediately. After witnessing my mother accidentally spill a drink on my dress at their anniversary party, the first of many such accidents, he pulled me aside and asked, "Does she do that often?" It was the first time someone had noticed without me having to point it out. Thomas became my rock, encouraging me to maintain boundaries with my parents while also respecting my desire to try to salvage some kind of relationship with them. "Family is complicated," he would say, "but that doesn't mean you have to accept being treated poorly." Despite the therapy and Thomas's support, I still found myself giving my parents chance after chance. Each family gathering would begin with hope, maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time they would see me, really see me, and treat me with the same respect and love they showed Nathan. But by the end of each event, I would be driving home in tears, promising myself I wouldn't put myself through it again. Yet I always did. Because despite everything, they were still my parents. And some small part of me still desperately wanted their approval, their love, their acknowledgement that I was worthy of being their daughter. This year's annual Mitchell family reunion was scheduled for the third Saturday in July, as always. For weeks leading up to it, I contemplated not going. I drafted text messages declining the invitation, rehearsed phone calls explaining my absence, and even considered booking a last-minute vacation to have a concrete excuse. But each time I got close to following through, something stopped me. Maybe this time would be different. "You don't have to go," Thomas reminded me as I agonized over my decision. "You know how it always ends." "I know," I said, staring at my closet as I tried to decide what to wear. "But Grandma Eleanor will be there, and she's turning 90 next month. And Cousin Amber just had her baby. I want to see them." Thomas sighed, knowing I was rationalizing. "Then I'm coming with you." Non-negotiable. I spent an embarrassing amount of time preparing for this event. I bought a new dress, an expensive white linen sundress that cost more than I would normally spend, but I wanted to look polished and put together. I rehearsed responses to potential criticisms. "Yes, I'm still at the same company." "No, we're not engaged yet." "Yes, I've considered moving back to Connecticut." I even practiced a serene smile in the mirror, determined not to let them see me flustered. The day of the reunion arrived with perfect weather, sunny and warm with a light breeze. As Thomas drove us through the wrought iron gates of my parents' estate, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. The sprawling Georgian-style mansion sat at the end of a long, tree-lined driveway, immaculate gardens stretching in every direction. 3 luxury cars I didn't recognize were already parked in the circular drive, alongside my brother Nathan's Tesla. "Remember," Thomas said, squeezing my hand, "we can leave anytime you want." My mother opened the door before we could ring the bell, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. At 58, Margaret Mitchell was still strikingly beautiful, with her ash blonde hair cut in a perfect bob and not a wrinkle in sight thanks to her biannual refreshers with her plastic surgeon. "Hazel, darling," she air-kissed both my cheeks. "You're looking healthy." Her eyes flicked over my body, lingering just long enough on my hips to make me self-conscious. "And Thomas, always a pleasure. Do come in." The house was already buzzing with family and friends. My father's parents, Eleanor and William, sat in matching armchairs in the living room. My mother's sister Judith and her husband Frank were on the patio with their children, my cousins Amber and Jason, and their respective spouses. Amber was gently rocking her 2-month-old daughter in her arms. Various family friends and business associates of my father mingled throughout the house and grounds. My father, Richard, was holding court by the bar, regaling a group of men with some story that had them all laughing uproariously. At 62, he still had the commanding presence that had served him well in the boardroom, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting authority and success. "There's my girl," he boomed when he spotted me, waving me over. I dutifully approached, accepting his brief hug that smelled of expensive cologne and scotch. "Gentlemen, this is my daughter Hazel. She's in advertising, isn't that right?" "Marketing," I corrected with a forced smile. "Brand strategy, specifically." Right," he waved dismissively. "These are my golf buddies, James, Philip, and Gregory. Gregory's son just made partner at Goldman Sachs. 32 years old, youngest partner in the firm's history." I nodded politely, knowing what was coming next. "Speaking of success," my father continued, "where's that brother of yours? Nathan just closed a spectacular deal. 8 figures. Practically did it single-handedly." He beamed with pride, as if he'd personally closed the deal himself. I excused myself to find Thomas, who had been cornered by my Aunt Judith. He threw me a grateful look as I approached. "Hazel," Judith said, kissing the air near my cheek. "That white dress is quite daring for someone with your complexion. I could never pull it off myself." The first hour continued in this vein, subtle digs wrapped in smiles, backhanded compliments, and constant comparisons to Nathan, who arrived fashionably late with his new girlfriend, a willowy blonde named Stephanie who worked as a wellness influencer, whatever that meant. My mother fluttered around Nathan, adjusting his collar, refreshing his drink, introducing Stephanie to everyone as practically family already, despite them dating for only 3 months. Meanwhile, she had barely acknowledged Thomas, my partner of 3 years. "Is it always this obvious?" Thomas whispered to me as we watched the display. "Actually, she's being subtle today," I replied, taking a long sip of my white wine. I found a moment of respite when I spotted my cousin Amber sitting alone on a bench in the garden, her baby sleeping peacefully in a portable bassinet beside her. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, lowering myself onto the bench. "Please do," Amber smiled, genuine warmth in her expression. I needed a break from the Margaret and Richard show. I laughed, feeling some tension leave my shoulders. Amber and I had grown closer in recent years, bonded by our shared understanding of the family dynamics. Her mother, my Aunt Judith, was cut from the same cloth as my mother, though less skilled at disguising her barbs as concern. "How are you holding up?" Amber asked, her voice lowered despite no one being nearby. "The usual," I shrugged. "Mom's already commented on my weight, my job, and my unmarried status. Dad's mentioned Nathan's success 3 times. I'm just waiting for the inevitable accident that will somehow be my fault." "I saw your mom eyeing your white dress earlier," Amber warned. "Bold choice. Like wearing a target." I sighed. "I know. Part of me just wanted to look nice, but another part was maybe testing them? Seeing if they could get through one event without finding a way to humiliate me." "Well, Thomas seems to be running interference pretty well," Amber nodded toward the patio, where Thomas was engaged in what appeared to be a deep conversation with my grandmother Eleanor, both of them laughing. "He's amazing," I said, feeling a rush of gratitude. "I don't think I could do these things without him anymore." "You shouldn't have to," Amber said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "You know, you're allowed to stop coming to these things. No one would blame you." "You would," I pointed out. "I'd miss you," she corrected. "But I'd understand. And we could meet in the city anytime. Without all this." She gestured vaguely at the perfectly manicured grounds and the people mingling with their perfect smiles and perfect clothes, hiding their perfectly awful personalities. As we were talking, I saw my mother approaching, her smile fixed and her eyes calculating. My stomach instantly knotted. "There you are, Hazel," she said. "Always hiding away. Come along, dinner is about to be announced, and I need your help with something." I exchanged a quick glance with Amber, who gave me a sympathetic look, before following my mother back toward the house, bracing myself for whatever was coming next. Everyone had gathered in the sprawling living room for my father's traditional pre-dinner speech. It was a Mitchell family reunion ritual. Richard would thank everyone for coming, share some anecdote about family heritage, and inevitably highlight Nathan's latest accomplishments. The catering staff was ready with trays of champagne for the toast that would follow. Just as I was about to take a seat next to Thomas, my mother intercepted me. "Hazel, darling," she said in that saccharine voice she used when she wanted something, "would you mind helping with the wine? Janet seems to be running behind." I glanced over at Janet, the head of the catering team who had worked for my parents for over a decade. She was efficiently directing her staff, everything running like clockwork as usual. "She looks like she's managing fine," I observed. "Don't be difficult, Hazel," my mother said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The servers are busy with the champagne. I just need you to bring the red wine bottles to the table." Surely that's not too much to ask. Thomas gave me a concerned look, but I shook my head slightly to indicate I'd handle it. It was easier than making a scene, and part of me still desperately wanted to be helpful, to earn their approval. In the kitchen, my mother handed me a tray with 4 open bottles of expensive Cabernet Sauvignon. They were heavy, and the tray was awkwardly balanced. "Wouldn't it be easier to have the servers bring these out one by one?" I suggested. "Everyone's waiting, Hazel," my mother said impatiently. "Just be careful. And don't drip any on the carpet." I made my way carefully back to the living room, where my father was midway through his speech. The room was crowded, with about 30 people standing around listening. I moved slowly, conscious of the open wine bottles and their potential for disaster on my white dress. I was nearly to the dining table when it happened. I was passing behind my mother, who was standing near the center of the room, nodding along to my father's words. Without warning, she took a step backward, directly into my path. The collision wasn't violent, but it was enough. The tray tilted, and one of the bottles of red wine tipped over. A wave of deep crimson liquid cascaded down the front of my white dress, splashing onto my shoes and the antique Persian rug beneath. A collective gasp went through the room. My father stopped mid-sentence. Every eye turned to me, standing there with red wine soaking through the expensive white fabric, spreading like a bloodstain across my chest and stomach. In the silence that followed, my mother turned around slowly. Her eyes widened in a performance of shock, but I caught it, that slight twitch at the corner of her mouth. The beginning of a smirk, quickly disguised as concern. "Oh, sorry," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the silent room. "It was just an accident." My father cleared his throat. "Well," he chuckled, "looks like someone should be more careful. Those bottles don't come cheap, you know." A few awkward laughs rippled through the crowd. I stood frozen, wine dripping from my dress onto the floor, my cheeks burning with humiliation. Across the room, I saw different reactions play across family members' faces. Grandma Eleanor looked troubled, her brow furrowed in concern. Cousin Amber was shaking her head slightly, her suspicions confirmed. Aunt Judith was poorly hiding her amusement. My brother Nathan looked uncomfortable but remained silent, his new girlfriend watching with wide eyes. And then there was Thomas. His face had hardened, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on my mother with a look of pure contempt. He started to move toward me, but something in my expression stopped him. Because in that moment, something shifted inside me. I felt the familiar wave of shame and embarrassment that had accompanied every public humiliation throughout my life. But this time it was followed by something else. Something hot and clarifying. Rage. The room seemed to hold its breath as I stood there, dripping with wine, my mother's false apology hanging in the air between us. "Hazel, dear," my mother said, her voice honey-sweet with false concern. "Why don't you go upstairs and change? I think I have something that might fit you, though it might be a bit small in the hips." More uncomfortable chuckles. More burning humiliation. But this time I didn't drop my eyes. This time I didn't rush away to cry in private. This time I held my mother's gaze and saw, for perhaps the first time, the cold calculation behind her performance of maternal concern. Time seemed to slow down as I stood there, wine dripping from my ruined dress. My mind raced through a lifetime of similar moments, the accidents, the public humiliations, the gaslighting when I tried to confront them. I thought of all the times I'd retreated to bathrooms or bedrooms to cry alone, telling myself I was overreacting. Then I remembered my last session with Dr. Collins. We had been discussing this exact family reunion, and my anxiety about attending. "What's the worst that could happen?" she had asked. "They'll find some way to humiliate me in front of everyone," I'd replied without hesitation. "And if that happens? I'll feel awful. Embarrassed. Small." "Yes, you'll feel those things," she'd acknowledged. "But what if, just this once, you didn't retreat? What if you stood your ground? Not aggressively, not trying to hurt them back, but simply refusing to play your assigned role in their drama?" The memory of her words crystallized something in me. I looked at my mother's expectant face. She was waiting for me to run away, to hide, to follow the script we'd been acting out my entire life. Instead, I smiled. It was a small smile, but a genuine one. I felt strangely calm. "You know what, Mom?" I said, my voice steady and clear. "You're right. Accidents happen." I set down the tray with the remaining wine bottles on a nearby table. Then, with deliberate movements, I picked up a full glass of red wine from a serving tray. The room had gone completely silent again, all eyes on me. I turned and, with perfect precision, tipped the glass of wine directly onto the front of my mother's cream-colored Chanel dress. The red liquid splashed dramatically against the expensive fabric, instantly creating a spreading stain across her chest. My mother gasped, her hands flying up in shock. "Oh, sorry," I said, mimicking her exact tone from moments before. "It was just an accident." The silence in the room deepened. My father's face turned an alarming shade of purple. My mother stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "How dare you?" my father finally sputtered, taking a step toward me. "That dress costs more than you make in a month." "Funny," I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "You weren't concerned about the cost of my dress when it was ruined. But then, that's always been the pattern, hasn't it?" "Hazel, you're making a scene," my mother hissed, trying to regain control of the situation. "This is completely inappropriate behavior." "Inappropriate behavior," I repeated thoughtfully. "Like the time you accidentally told everyone about my failed relationship with James right after we broke up. Or when you forgot to mention that the time for my college graduation ceremony had changed, so you and Dad missed it entirely? Or perhaps like the countless times you've found ways to humiliate me in public while maintaining plausible deniability?" The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in people's drinks. No one moved. No one seemed to breathe. "I don't know what you're talking about," my mother said stiffly. "You've always been so sensitive, imagining slights where none exist." "Gaslighting," I said clearly. "That's what my therapist calls it when you try to make me doubt my own reality. But I'm not doubting anymore. And I'm not the only one who sees it." I looked around the room, making eye contact with various family members. "Amber has seen it. Grandma Eleanor has seen it. Thomas has seen it. I'd bet most people in this room have noticed but were too uncomfortable to say anything." My mother's face had gone pale beneath her perfect makeup. My father stepped forward, pointing toward the door. "I think you should leave," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "You're clearly not well." Thomas moved to my side, placing a supportive hand on my lower back. But before I could respond to my father, an unexpected voice broke in. "She's not going anywhere, Richard." My grandmother Eleanor had risen from her chair, her 90-year-old frame somehow commanding the room. "And she's not unwell. She's finally speaking the truth." My father turned to his mother in disbelief. "Mom, you can't possibly be encouraging this behavior." "What I've been watching for years is your behavior, and Margaret's," Grandma Eleanor said firmly. "I've stayed quiet too long because I didn't want to interfere. That was my mistake." A murmur went through the room. My Aunt Judith stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. "Margaret," she said carefully to my mother, "there have been incidents over the years that have seemed deliberate." "This is ridiculous," my mother snapped. "I'm being attacked in my own home over an accident. Like when you accidentally announced Hazel's promotion at work right before sharing that Nathan had bought his first house, completely overshadowing her news. This came from my cousin Jason, Amber's brother, who had always been quiet at family gatherings. Or when you accidentally invited Hazel's ex-boyfriend and his new fiancée to last year's Christmas party without warning her." Amber added, shifting her baby in her arms. One by one, family members began sharing their observations of patterns I had thought only I had noticed. With each example, my parents' faces grew more rigid, their denials more desperate. "You've all been turned against us," my father finally declared. "By her." He pointed accusingly at me. "No, Dad," came a voice I least expected. My brother Nathan had stepped forward, looking deeply uncomfortable but determined. "No one turned anyone against you. We've all just seen how you treat Hazel compared to me. I've benefited from it my whole life, so I never said anything. That was wrong of me." I stared at my brother in shock. In all our years, he had never acknowledged the disparity in our treatment, let alone publicly sided with me against our parents. My mother, seeing her carefully constructed narrative crumbling, attempted one last defense. "We have always loved both our children equally," she insisted, tears welling in her eyes. tears I now recognized as tactical rather than emotional. If Hazel felt otherwise, it's because she's always been more difficult, more demanding of attention. That's enough, Margaret, Grandma Eleanor said firmly. The girl was never difficult. She was just less willing to blindly worship you than her brother was. I looked around the room at my family, some supportive, some confused, some still processing the public airing of our family's dysfunction. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen in this house. I don't want to fight, I said finally. I don't want to hurt you or humiliate you. I just want to be treated with basic respect. And if that's not possible, then I need to protect myself by limiting our contact. I turned to Thomas. I think we should go now. He nodded, squeezing my hand supportively. Hazel, my father called as we turned to leave. If you walk out now, don't expect things to go back to normal the next time we see you. I paused at the doorway and looked back at him. That's the point, Dad. I don't want things to go back to normal. Normal wasn't healthy. With that, Thomas and I walked out of my parents' house, leaving behind a stained dress, a roomful of stunned relatives, and decades of silent acceptance. As the front door closed behind us, I felt a strange mixture of liberation and terror. My hands were shaking, and my ruined dress was becoming uncomfortable as the wine dried in stiff patches against my skin. Thomas guided me to a bench in the garden, away from the windows of the house. I can't believe I just did that, I whispered, adrenaline still coursing through my system. I can, Thomas said, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. It's been coming for a long time. Before we could decide on our next move, the front door opened again. My heart sank, expecting to see my father storming out to continue the confrontation. Instead, my cousin Amber emerged, carrying a small overnight bag. Your emergency kit, she explained, handing it to me. I snuck upstairs and grabbed it from the guest room. Figured you might need a change of clothes. I had forgotten that I'd started keeping a bag with basic necessities at my parents' house for these extended family events, a habit born from too many accidents that left me needing to change. Thank you, I said, taking the bag gratefully. How's it going in there? Amber let out a low whistle. Nuclear. Your dad is raging, your mom is crying to anyone who'll listen about her ungrateful daughter. But here's the thing, people aren't buying it anymore. Once you broke the silence, it's like permission was granted for everyone to acknowledge what they've seen over the years. Really? I asked, surprised. Really, she confirmed. Your grandmother is being especially fierce. I've never seen her stand up to your dad like this. She told him he's been failing you as a father for decades and it's time he took a hard look at himself. I tried to imagine my traditional, conflict-averse grandmother saying such things to my domineering father and found it almost impossible to picture. And Nathan? I asked hesitantly. He's quiet, but he's not backing down from what he said, Amber reported. Stephanie looks completely shell-shocked. Welcome to the Mitchell family, honey. She laughed without humor. As we were talking, the front door opened again. This time it was my Uncle Frank, Aunt Judith's husband, followed by Jason and his wife Megan. We're heading out, Frank announced. And we wanted to check on you first. I was touched by their concern but also confused. Frank had always been firmly in my father's corner at family gatherings. I'm okay, I assured them. Just processing everything. Frank nodded awkwardly. What happened in there? It was a long time coming. Your aunt and I have had discussions over the years about how your parents treat you. I should have said something sooner. We all should have, Jason added. The family dynamic was so established that it seemed easier to just go along with it. The emperor has no clothes, his wife Megan said quietly. Once someone finally points it out, everyone can suddenly see it. More family members began trickling out of the house. Some stopped to express support or solidarity, others nodded awkwardly from a distance, uncomfortable with the situation but unwilling to pretend nothing had happened. To my surprise, one of my father's golf buddies approached us, looking uncomfortable but determined. Your father and I have been friends for 30 years, he said without preamble. In all that time, I've noticed how differently he talks about you and your brother. I never said anything because it wasn't my place. But what I saw in there today. He shook his head. It took courage, what you did. Just wanted you to know not everyone thinks you overreacted. As he walked away, Thomas squeezed my hand. See? You're not crazy. You're not oversensitive. Other people have seen it too. The validation from multiple sources was overwhelming. For years, I had doubted my own perceptions, wondered if I was indeed imagining slights or overreacting to innocent comments. Having others confirm what I'd experienced was both vindicating and heartbreaking. Vindicating because I wasn't wrong, heartbreaking because if others had noticed, why had no one spoken up before? The biggest surprise came about 20 minutes later, when Nathan emerged from the house. He approached hesitantly, his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. Can I talk to you? He asked, glancing uncertainly at Thomas. I'll give you two some space, Thomas said, moving a short distance away but keeping me in his sightline, protective even now. Nathan sat beside me on the bench, staring at his hands. I'm sorry, he said finally. I've known for years that they treat us differently. I told myself it was because you were stronger than me, that you didn't need their approval the way I did. But that was just an excuse. Why now? I asked. Why speak up today after all these years? He was quiet for a moment. Watching Mom do that so deliberately, and then lie about it. I couldn't pretend anymore. And seeing you stand up to them. He shook his head. You've always been braver than me, Hazel. I wasn't brave, I corrected him. I was desperate. There's a difference. Either way, he said, I should have been a better brother. I benefited from being the favorite, and I never questioned it. We sat in silence for a moment, 25 years of complex family dynamics hanging between us. What happens now? He finally asked. I don't know, I admitted. I can't go back to the way things were. But I'm not trying to cut them out of my life completely. I just need boundaries. Nathan nodded slowly. I think I might need some too, he said, surprising me. Being the golden child comes with its own kind of cage. Before we could continue our conversation, the front door opened again, and my grandmother emerged, supported by one of the catering staff. She spotted us and waved the server away, making her way slowly toward our bench. Grandma, you should be resting, Nathan said, jumping up to help her. I'll rest when I'm dead, she retorted, lowering herself carefully onto the bench between us. Which, admittedly, might be sooner rather than later, but not today. Despite everything, I found myself smiling at her familiar dry humor. I owe you both an apology, she said without preamble. I've watched how your parents have treated you, Hazel, and I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere in how they raised their children. That was a coward's excuse. You stood up for me today, I reminded her. Too little, too late, she said firmly. But better late than never, I suppose. I want you both to know something. She took one of our hands in each of hers. I am proud of you. Both of you. For different reasons. Hazel, for finally standing up for yourself. Nathan, for finally acknowledging the truth, even when it would have been easier to stay silent. She squeezed our hands, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman of her age. Family is important. But not at the cost of your dignity or your truth. Remember that. After a few more minutes of conversation, Thomas and I decided it was time to leave. The confrontation had left me emotionally drained, and the wine-soaked dress was becoming uncomfortable. I changed quickly in my parents' pool house, putting on the spare clothes from my emergency bag. As we prepared to depart, various family members came to say goodbye, some offering hugs, others awkward well wishes. My parents remained inside the house, their absence speaking volumes. Are you okay? Thomas asked as we drove away from my childhood home, the sprawling estate growing smaller in the rearview mirror. I considered the question carefully, taking stock of my emotions, the lingering adrenaline, the fatigue, the uncertainty about what would happen next, but also a strange, unfamiliar lightness. "No," I answered honestly. "But I think I will be." The first week after the confrontation passed in a strange haze. I kept expecting my phone to explode with angry calls and texts from my parents, but there was only silence. It was as if a storm had hit, and now we were all surveying the damage, unsure how to proceed. I threw myself into work, grateful for the distraction. My colleagues noticed the change in me, a new focus, a willingness to speak up in meetings where I had previously held back. My boss commented on my refreshing assertiveness during a particularly challenging client presentation. "Something's different about you," she observed afterward. "Whatever it is, it's working." The first contact from my family came not from my parents, but from Grandma Eleanor. Her handwritten letter arrived 10 days after the reunion, her elegant penmanship spanning 3 pages of heavy cream stationery. "Dearest Hazel," she wrote. "I've been reflecting on what happened and my role in allowing it to continue for so long. While I cannot change the past, I want you to know that I stand with you now and going forward. Your grandfather and I have had several difficult conversations with your father. He is, predictably, resistant to acknowledging his behavior, but seeds have been planted. Whether they take root remains to be seen." She went on to share stories from my father's childhood, patterns of favoritism shown by my grandfather that had shaped him, cycles of behavior being repeated across generations. It wasn't an excuse, she emphasized, but perhaps context that might help me understand. Breaking generational patterns takes tremendous courage, she concluded. You've shown that courage, and I couldn't be prouder. Whatever happens next, know that you have allies in your corner. Other family members reached out as well. Amber invited me to lunch to meet her new baby properly. Jason and his wife included me in a dinner party where, for the first time, family gossip didn't center around critiquing my life choices. Even distant cousins I barely knew sent supportive messages, many admitting they had noticed the dynamic but never felt it was their place to intervene. Dr. Collins, my therapist, helped me process the flood of emotions the confrontation had unleashed. What you're experiencing is a major shift in your family system, she explained during our session. For years, you played a specific role, the scapegoat. When you refused to play that role anymore, it forced everyone to adjust. That's uncomfortable, but it's also an opportunity for genuine change. 3 weeks after the incident, I received a text message that made my heart race, Nathan asking if we could meet for lunch. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe halfway between our workplaces. He arrived looking tired, the confident golden boy facade nowhere in evidence. After awkward greetings and small talk about work, he got to the point. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, turning his coffee cup in circles on the table. "About our childhood, about how differently Mom and Dad treated us. I always knew it wasn't fair, but I told myself it wasn't that bad, or that you were stronger than me and didn't need their approval." "It's not your fault," I said automatically, the peacemaker role still deeply ingrained. "No, but I was complicit," he insisted. "I accepted the favoritism because it benefited me. I never stood up for you. Even when I saw Mom deliberately set you up for embarrassment, I stayed silent." His honesty was surprising. Nathan had always followed our parents' lead in dismissing my concerns, suggesting I was too sensitive or imagining slights. "What changed?" I asked. "Why now?" He was quiet for a moment. "Seeing it happen so blatantly at the reunion, watching you finally stand up for yourself, it forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths. And then afterward, Dad expected me to automatically take his side, to condemn your inappropriate behavior. When I wouldn't, he was shocked. Like it had never occurred to him that I might form my own opinion." "How are they?" I asked, surprised by how much I still cared despite everything. "Mom's oscillating between playing the victim and pretending nothing happened. Dad's angry. He feels betrayed, by you for standing up to them, by me for not backing him up, by Grandma for calling him out." Nathan ran a hand through his hair. "But here's the thing, beneath the anger, I think they're scared. The family dynamic they've controlled for decades is shifting, and they don't know how to handle it. We talked for nearly 3 hours, diving into childhood memories and comparing our different experiences of the same events. For the first time, Nathan seemed to truly hear my perspective without defensiveness. And I began to understand the pressure he had faced as the golden child, the impossible expectations, the conditional love dependent on achievement, the fear of disappointing our parents that had kept him firmly in line. "I'm not saying what I experienced was as damaging as what you went through," he clarified. "But being the favorite isn't as great as it looks from the outside. It's a gilded cage." By the time we parted, something had shifted between us. The artificial divide our parents had created was beginning to heal, allowing us to see each other as allies rather than competitors. 2 more weeks passed before I heard directly from either of my parents. The call from my mother came on a Tuesday evening as I was preparing dinner with Thomas. "Hazel," she said when I answered, her voice carrying its usual veneer of control. "I hope you're doing well." "I am, thank you," I replied neutrally, catching Thomas's concerned glance from across the kitchen. "The garden committee luncheon is next Saturday," she continued as if the confrontation had never happened. "I've put your name down. Wear something appropriate, not white, obviously." She gave a small laugh at what she clearly thought was a witty reference. I took a deep breath, centering myself. "Mom, I won't be attending the garden committee luncheon." "Don't be ridiculous," she dismissed. "You always attend. What will people think if you're not there?" "I'm sure you'll come up with an explanation," I said evenly. "But after what happened at the reunion, we need to have an actual conversation before we go back to social events together." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I don't see what there is to discuss," she finally said, her voice cooler. "You made quite a scene over an accident, embarrassed the entire family, and now you want to discuss it? I think an apology would be more appropriate." "I'm not apologizing for standing up for myself," I said firmly. "And it wasn't an accident. We both know that." Another silence, longer this time. "If that's how you feel," she finally said, "then perhaps it's best if we take some time apart." "I agree," I replied, surprising her and myself with my calm acceptance. "I think that would be healthy." The conversation ended soon after, my mother clearly unsettled by my failure to cave to her manipulation as I always had before. The following weekend, Thomas and I met with a family therapist who specialized in adult parent-child relationships. Dr. Melissa Rivera listened intently as I described the patterns of behavior, the public humiliations, and the recent confrontation. "What you're describing sounds like a classic narcissistic family system," she observed. "Your mother likely has narcissistic traits, with your father as an enabler. You were cast in the role of scapegoat, while your brother was the golden child. So there's no hope for improvement?" I asked, part of me still longing for the loving family I had never had. "I didn't say that," Dr. Rivera clarified. "Change is possible, but it requires several things. Your parents would need to acknowledge the problematic behavior, take responsibility for the harm caused, and commit to doing the difficult work of changing long-standing patterns. And you would need to maintain firm boundaries while they do that work." "And if they can't or won't do those things?" Thomas asked, his hand supportive on my back. "Then Hazel needs to decide what kind of relationship she can have with them while protecting her own well-being," she answered gently. "Sometimes that means limited contact with very clear boundaries. Sometimes it means no contact, at least for a period of healing." Over the next few months, I worked with both Dr. Collins and Dr. Rivera to establish healthier boundaries with my parents. There were difficult phone calls, tearful nights, and moments of doubt when I wondered if the estrangement was worth the pain. But there were also breakthroughs, in my career as my newfound confidence led to a promotion, in my relationship with Thomas as our bond deepened through the crisis, and in unexpected relationships with extended family who reached out in support. My father eventually requested a meeting, nearly 3 months after the reunion. We met at a neutral location, a private room at a restaurant equidistant from our homes. He arrived in his usual immaculate suit, but something about him seemed diminished. "Your mother couldn't make it," he said by way of greeting. She's not feeling well. I nodded, unsurprised. My mother had always avoided difficult conversations, sending my father to handle conflicts. I've been thinking about what happened, he began stiffly after we were seated. While I don't condone your behavior, I can acknowledge that there may have been patterns in our family dynamic that were unhealthy. It wasn't exactly an apology, but for my proud father, it was significant. Thank you for acknowledging that, I said carefully. Your grandmother has been quite vocal in her opinions, he continued with a hint of his old irritation. She seems to think I've failed you as a father. I waited, letting him find his way through this unfamiliar territory. Have I? He finally asked, meeting my eyes directly for what felt like the first time in years. Failed you? The question hung between us, loaded with decades of unmet needs and unacknowledged pain. I could have lashed out, listed every hurt, every dismissal, every time he had chosen Nathan over me. But that wouldn't lead to healing. There were times when I needed a father who saw me, valued me, and protected me, I said carefully. And yes, there were times when that didn't happen. But I'm not interested in assigning blame anymore. I'm interested in whether we can build a healthier relationship going forward. He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. I don't know how to do that, he admitted. This, emotional talk. It's not my strength. It's not mine either, I acknowledged. I've needed professional help to navigate it. Maybe that's something to consider. To my surprise, my father didn't immediately dismiss the suggestion of therapy. Perhaps, he said noncommittally. In the meantime, your mother and I are hosting a small dinner next month. Nothing elaborate. We'd like you and Thomas to attend. It was a small olive branch, tentatively extended. I'll think about it, I promised. But if we come, there need to be clear understandings about respect. He nodded again, the old Richard Mitchell who would have bristled at conditions from his daughter nowhere in evidence. Reasonable, he conceded. As our meeting concluded, he hesitated, then asked, Are you happy, Hazel? In your life, I mean. The question caught me off guard. I thought about my growing confidence at work, my strengthened relationships with Nathan and other family members, my deepening bond with Thomas, and the peace that came from finally standing in my truth. Yes, I answered honestly. I am. Something like relief flickered across his face. Good, he said simply. That's good. 2 weeks later, Thomas proposed. It wasn't a grand, elaborate gesture, just the two of you. 1 year after the confrontation at the family reunion, I hosted a small gathering at the home Thomas and I had purchased together, a charming colonial with a garden that had sold me the moment I saw it. It wasn't a formal event, just a casual dinner to celebrate our first anniversary in the house. The guest list was carefully considered, Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa William, Nathan and his new girlfriend, not Stephanie, who hadn't lasted long after witnessing our family dynamics, Amber and her husband with their now 1-year-old daughter, a few close friends, and, yes, my parents. As I arranged flowers in the dining room, I reflected on how much had changed in a year. The relationship with my parents had been rebuilt, not to what it was before, but to something new. Something healthier. There had been setbacks, of course. My mother still occasionally slipped into old patterns, making subtly undermining comments or forgetting important details. My father still sometimes compared me to Nathan, though he caught himself more often than not these days. But the most significant change wasn't in their behavior, it was in my response to it. Where once I would have internalized their criticisms, now I could recognize them for what they were. Where once I would have remained silent to keep the peace, now I could calmly call out inappropriate comments. I had boundaries, and I enforced them consistently. The doorbell rang, announcing the first guests. It was my parents, arriving precisely on time as always. The house looks lovely, Hazel, my mother said as she entered, her eyes taking in every detail. There was genuine admiration in her voice, though I caught the slight pause as she noticed a decorating choice that didn't align with her taste. But instead of making a critical comment, she simply smiled. You've made it so warm and inviting. My father handed me a bottle of wine, a Cabernet Sauvignon. There was a moment of shared recognition, a hint of humor in his eyes that would have been unthinkable a year ago. "Not to be spilled on anyone's clothes," he said dryly. "Appreciated," I replied with a small smile. The evening progressed with a ease I wouldn't have thought possible before. My mother still dominated conversations and my father still talked too much about work, but there was a new awareness to their interactions, a consciousness of patterns they were trying to break. After dinner, as everyone moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, I found myself alone in the kitchen with my grandmother. "You've created a beautiful home, my dear," she said, helping me arrange cookies on a serving plate despite my protests that she should be resting. "Thank you," I said. "I'm happy here." "I can see that," she nodded. "You know, watching you this past year has been remarkable. You're not the same person you were." "For better or worse?" I asked with a smile. "Definitely better," she assured me. "You found your voice. Your strength. It's what I always hoped for you, even when I failed to help you find it." "You're helping now," I reminded her. "That counts for a lot." From the living room, I could hear laughter, Nathan telling a story that had everyone engaged. Even more surprising was hearing my mother's genuine laugh in response to something Thomas had said. "They're trying," my grandmother observed, following my gaze. "It's not perfect, and it may never be. Old habits die hard, especially when they're rooted in their own unresolved issues. But they're trying." "I know," I acknowledged. "And I appreciate the effort, even when they fall short." "And that," she said, patting my hand, "is growth on your part too. Recognizing effort without excusing harmful behavior. Setting boundaries without closing the door completely. It's a delicate balance." We rejoined the others, where the conversation had turned to wedding plans. Thomas and I had set a date for the following spring, a small ceremony in a botanical garden we both loved. "Have you decided who's walking you down the aisle?" my mother asked, clearly expecting the answer to be my father. There was a moment of tension as all eyes turned to me. A year ago, this would have been a minefield, either disappointing my father by choosing someone else, or compromising my own wishes to keep the peace. "Actually," I said calmly, "I've decided to walk myself down the aisle. It feels right to me, making that journey on my own terms before joining Thomas." I could see the flicker of disappointment in my father's eyes, but to his credit, he nodded. "It's your day," he said. "You should do what feels meaningful to you." My mother opened her mouth, likely to argue, but closed it again after a pointed look from Grandma Eleanor. "Well," she said instead, "the photos will certainly be unique." It wasn't perfect acceptance, but it was progress. And I could live with progress. Later, as guests were preparing to leave, Nathan pulled me aside. "I wanted to tell you something," he said, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I've started seeing someone. A therapist, I mean." "That's great," I said, genuinely pleased. "How's it going?" "Hard," he admitted. "Turns out being the golden child comes with its own set of issues. But good. Clarifying. It's helping me understand why I was so willing to accept Mom and Dad's version of everything for so long. Why I needed their approval so desperately." "I'm proud of you," I told him. "That takes courage." "I learned from the best," he said, giving me a quick hug before rejoining the others. As Thomas and I said goodbye to the last guests, my parents lingered in the entryway. "This was lovely, Hazel," my mother said. "We should do it more often." "I'd like that," I replied honestly. "Maybe next month at your place?" "Perfect," she agreed. Then, with visible effort, she added, "And I'll try to remember that you don't eat shellfish when I plan the menu." It was a small thing, remembering a basic preference of mine that she had forgotten countless times over the years. But in the context of our relationship, it represented a significant effort at change. After they left, Thomas and I cleaned up together, falling into the comfortable rhythm we'd developed over our years together. "That went well," he observed, loading the dishwasher while I wrapped leftovers. "Surprisingly well," I agreed. No major incidents, no tears, no storming out. For the Mitchell family, that's practically a miracle. He laughed, then grew more serious. You know, watching you with your parents today, the way you maintained your boundaries while still being open to connection, it was impressive. A year ago, you either avoided conflict entirely or exploded when it became too much. Now you navigate it with such grace. I had good support, I said, squeezing his hand. And a lot of therapy. True, he acknowledged with a smile. But the work was all yours. You broke a cycle that had been in place your entire life. That takes incredible courage. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror and paused. The woman looking back at me was different from the one who had stood dripping with wine in her parents' living room a year ago. The physical features were the same, but there was a confidence in her posture, a clarity in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The journey wasn't over, of course. Healing rarely follows a neat, linear path. There would still be difficult conversations, boundary violations to address, old patterns that would need to be recognized and redirected. But for perhaps the first time in my life, I felt equipped to handle whatever came next. The confrontation at the family reunion hadn't just changed my relationship with my parents, it had transformed how I moved through the world. I spoke up more at work, leading to a promotion. I formed deeper friendships, no longer afraid that people would abandon me if I expressed disagreement. I made decisions based on what I truly wanted, not what would cause the least conflict. Most importantly, I had learned that standing up for yourself doesn't have to mean cutting people out of your life entirely. Sometimes it does, when the relationship is too toxic to salvage. But sometimes, as in my case, it creates the possibility for something new to emerge, something healthier, more authentic, and ultimately more loving than what existed before. As I climbed into bed beside Thomas, I thought about all the people watching this video who might be struggling with their own family dynamics, their own patterns of manipulation and gaslighting, their own fears of rocking the boat. If you're one of those people, I want you to know that change is possible. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but it is possible. You deserve to be treated with respect. You deserve to have your feelings acknowledged, your boundaries honored, your truth believed. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for the family members who may be trapped in unhealthy patterns themselves, is to stand in that truth, even when it's uncomfortable. The moment I finally stood up for myself wasn't just about spilled wine on a white dress. It was about reclaiming my voice, my dignity, my place in my family not as the scapegoat but as an equal deserving of respect. That single moment of courage changed everything that followed. What patterns in your life might be transformed by a similar moment of truth? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story helpful, please like and subscribe to hear more about setting boundaries and building healthier relationships. And if you know someone who might benefit from this message, please share it with them. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in our struggles makes all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, it's never too late to change the narrative of your life. The first step is believing you deserve better. The rest will follow.